Hey guys, Fox here, and today we have some pretty big news coming out from Gregg Williams, of all people, about potential expansion for the United Football League next year. Now, this is a big deal. A lot of people are very contentious about this, whether or not you think they should expand next year, whether you think they should stay 8 teams for a couple of years, as well as whether or not this is ending up being true. The bottom line is this is a pretty big deal. We're going to get right into it by looking at exactly what the quote was. This is the basic quote, is that with the success of this year, they're looking at selling the teams into different markets, plus increasing from 8 teams this year to 12 teams the next year and 16 the following year. Basically, 2025 we have 12 teams, and then 2026 we have 16 teams. I'll put a link in the description to this exact Twitter post that has the 52-second clip. This is from a massive hour-long interview, but the clip gives you a pretty good summary of what exactly they're trying to do. Now, could Cleveland get a UFL team is basically them just saying that. The point is with this one is that this is a big deal. Whether or not ends up happening, the most important thing I think is actually the fact that they'll be selling teams. I'll get to that in a little bit, or let's just get to it right now. Essentially, the selling teams in different markets is where the big thing is. A lot of people are kind of scared that this means that teams will not be returning. Some think this means teams will be. The fact is that selling teams into different markets, in all honesty, really doesn't matter for expansion. If they're able to sell off new teams, or let's just say bring back a team like the Seattle Sea Dragons with an outside buyer that isn't, Redbird, Fox, someone in the league, the UFL isn't really in an issue there, right? They're not owning the team, so if something bad happens, they're not really affected. The risk is a lot lower if they add in new teams for other people to buy. Now, if they sell off the 8 teams they currently have, that's a bit different. But in all honesty, an owner buying a team provides less risk to the UFL because now they're not having to be out in all the money. You know what I mean? They're not the ones having to pay for the players, pay for the stadium rights and all that. So it benefits the league to have these owners come in as quick as possible, to where maybe we see some of these teams that are playing right now get bought this next year, or we just see teams that come into the fray be it. Now, I will say some people are saying that this has no chance of being true, or it's just Gregg Williams saying stuff. And I bring you the one piece of evidence we do have that shows that this could be very true. John DeFilippo. When he got hired November 9th, I believe it was, by the New Orleans Breakers in the USFL, and basically 3 days later he was in an interview, and he basically kind of name dropped that there would be 2 new hub cities added to the USFL for the 2023 season. We already knew about Birmingham returning, but he basically name dropped both Memphis and Michigan, or Detroit. We did not know about this, and then 3 days later the announcement was official that the Bandits would become the Memphis Showboats, and we knew that the Showboats would be playing in Memphis. And then we wouldn't be until January where we had a USFL insider talk about there would be 4 hub cities with both Memphis and Detroit being named in there. And then officially we heard it in late January. So almost 2 full months early, or literally 2 full months early, we heard from John DeFilippo that these 2 cities would host teams. We heard about him say Memphis and Detroit. Canton came out later, but he still was the first to name drop 2 of these teams months in advance. So there's a very real shot that what Gregg Williams is talking about is true. And the important thing to note is that he did say with the success of this year. I would assume that, let's say the league is able to have, let's just say 800,000 viewers per game, or maybe 1 million, has over 10,000 fans at every single game. I would assume that's a very successful year and expansion is a must, or basically viewed as we can do it and not risk. Because again, if you get extra owners, you lose the risk of having to add new teams because of the fact that you're not really on the hook. Now, I will say, I think that the league needs to bring back teams. I think that they need to bring back teams and try to force people to buy them in certain areas. Because while, yes, expansion teams would be a cool idea, at least for the first season, there's a lot of teams that need to be brought back that already have a strong fan base. And I'd assume that a lot of outside owners probably feel the same way. Yes, I'd love to see a team come to Raleigh, NC. People want to see a team in Albuquerque, among many other cities, San Diego, and all that. The bottom line is we don't know for sure if they're going to be able to do that. Even though they could, I think that the league probably would rather have these teams return, just actually owned by people that aren't, the UFL. So the teams that are on hiatus, 4 from the XFL side and the Guardians, Wildcats, Sea Dragons, and Vipers. And then we have 6 on the USFL side, the Gamblers, Generals, Breakers, Stars, Maulers, and Bandits. Now, for this whole thing, I'm assuming we keep the Roughnecks in the USFL conference, even though we've seen before teams switch conferences completely, like the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL. The fact is, I doubt that they want to create more confusion with the Roughnecks, and I feel like they're probably just going to keep them in the USFL conference. So we're going with this based that they are doing that. Now, because it is conference-based, we actually have to kind of add these teams together for USFL and XFL side. Now in 2025, I think the 5 teams they should try to get owners for or bring back, or the 4 teams, are the Sea Dragons, Vipers, Stars, and Maulers. Even though I'm a big proponent of a guy that thinks we have to hold out the West expansion for a couple years, if the league is super successful this year and they get new owners, it really doesn't matter if they're going to expand out west. So I think this would be a good time to bring back the Sea Dragons and the Vipers. The Sea Dragons because, of course, the only reason their stadium, didn't get super filled this past season was because the XFL just completely botched the schedule of the Sea Dragons. And as for the Vipers, because of the fact they already knew that they were probably moving, they can go basically anywhere. They're not really having to be tied down anywhere. Granted, no team is technically, but especially in this case, you could bring the Vipers back to Vegas. You could move them to Reno like some people want. You can bring them to Portland, which I think is a good idea. And none of those really are bad because everybody already expected them to move. Now, on the USFL side, I'd say for making it easy, the Stars and Maulers, I know Highmark Stadium is going to probably go into renovations at some point to try and triple their capacity, which is a big deal, which I actually said that they should do like a few months ago. But I think that bringing back the 2 Pennsylvania teams as possible is a good idea. So you're able to keep at least one side's travel costs pretty low, and you're bringing back teams that could form an instant rivalry. And the fact is that the Stars are one of the true kings of spring football. When you think of spring football, in terms of dominant teams, you think of the Stars, you think of that great 80s teams, and you think of the fact they made it to the championship game the first year back. Now again, this is all dependent on if we get owners for them, but I'd assume that very much another possibility is if, let's say, 4 people or groups decide to buy current teams, the UFL could add 4 more teams and still be on the hook for 8 teams, but just have different ones, you know what I mean? I wouldn't be shocked at that either, so I think this is very possible. This is what I'd do in 2025. Now, 2026 is when I'd bring back the Breakers. As we've talked about, we know exactly where they're probably going to play at the Shrine, but they're not going to be done until 2026. Bring back the Breakers. Aside from the Dragons, they're the most must-bring-back team. They had a huge fan base despite them never playing New Orleans. And then I'd also bring back the New Jersey Generals. Bring them to a big market because you're now missing out in the Florida, California, and New York area. Bring back the Generals. And for the XL side, I would bring back the Guardians, but put them in New York. Again, you're putting 2 teams right next to each other, and you create a instant interconference rivalry between the Guardians and the Generals. And then I would, at this point, bring in an expansion team. Whether that be an old team, like you get a new stadium, because I believe Camping World's in the renovations, you bring back like the Orlando Rage. Whether you bring back a team from the original XFL like that. Or maybe you get the rights to the AAF names at some point down the line, and you want to bring back a team there, or make a true expansion team. I think this is where you started. You had 1 in 2026. I think you should try and get at least, a pretty decent amount of the teams, because in total we've had like 18 teams across both these leagues in the modern era. Bring back at least like 15 of them. Because at this point, you're missing just teams like the Wildcats, which nobody really missed, and LA is just such a bad area for like spring football at this point. So you wouldn't bring back them. You wouldn't bring back the Bandits, which, even though I think that they are a very important spring football team in history, I understand why you wouldn't. You've kind of burned that market twice now in a true way. But I feel like if you're not going to bring back a USFL team, them and the Gamblers probably happen. The Gamblers just because the fact there's already a Houston team. And I feel like at that point, you've done a pretty good job at bringing back teams. And I think that this is where you'd add the expansion team or, again, an old XFL team like from the original one or something like that. Because the USFL side, you have a bunch of teams from the OG USFL you could bring back at some point, right? You could bring back, a team for Washington, the Federals. You could bring back a team like, the Renegades for the USFL as well, which I guess you can't really now because, the Arlington. But you still have teams, the San Antonio Gunslingers, Denver Gold. You still have a lot of options, the Chicago Blitz, a lot of options for the USFL side you could always bring back later that you could add as a quote-unquote expansion team in that sense with new owners. But I feel like this is where you bring the first true expansion team, add 1 in 1 year, and then later on down the line go from there. Is that really what I think the league should do in terms of this expansion, if this is true? Again, saying it's based on the success this year is important for a certain expansion, but I think, again, if they're able to get owners, this could all change it. I wouldn't be shocked if they decided, scratch the idea of bringing back one old team if it means getting an owner for a city just somewhere else. I hope they don't go with some of the more basic cities. I mean, there's a lot of areas in the country that haven't had teams like in a long time or ever they should go to, but we'll see again. I think that they should try and prioritize bringing back teams that they have already put in hiatus. They basically said that they are on hiatus, not, dissolved or anything. So try and get owners to bring those teams back. You do have a decent amount of cities to do. And even if it isn't 4 teams, even just bringing back 2 teams next year would be a big deal. Showing that you are trying to bring back these teams gives a lot of hope to fans of teams that haven't brought back. Like, yes, let's just say you don't even bring back the Sea Dragons or Breakers next year. But instead you bring back the Guardians, and whether you put them in New York or somewhere else, and you bring back, let's just say you bring back just the Maulers. Now fans of the Breakers and Sea Dragons are actually going to be more apt to go back and watch the league if they decide to stop, because they're thinking, hey, my team probably will come back. If these 2 did, why wouldn't mine? So that's what I think is the best case scenario and what they should do. Now again, in terms of rushing expansion, I will say this. I do want to see teams come back, but I'd like to have 1 year where we don't see any major shift in spring football. We had 2019's AAF, then it was 2020 XFL, then 2022 USFL. Even if you forget the 23 XFL, the USFL still changed the team from the Bandits to the Showboats and rebranded the Maulers to be, the black and gold. So, and that's not even counting the XFL. And now we have the UFL instead. I'd like for 1 year to be the exact same as the year before. That's a good thing. I can't stress this enough. If next year we still have these exact 8 teams, and the only difference is pending if Houston changes stadium, but if we have these exact same 8 teams and none of them rebrand, I think that's a massive success. I really do. Because that'll give us a full year heading into a new season, 2 years of the same exact spring football landscape. That's what we want. Consistency, proof it can work. That's the ultimate proof of concept, is if we keep the same league the same way for 2 years. Now, maybe they want to wait until they have 16 teams like Gregg Williams says, and then stay a few years the same. I'm fine with that too. I just sooner than later would like to see the league or a league be able to stay with one group of teams. Don't change it for a couple seasons, and that shows success. But we'll see. These are my thoughts on it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. What cities would you like an expansion team to go to? What teams do you think should return if they can? How do you think they're going to do with owners and all that? Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to become a member and support the channel, you can click the link in the description of the join button to get an exclusive monthly video, channel badge, exclusive channel or member emojis, as well as exclusive sneak peeks to videos and all that. And as always, have a great night.